Welcome to Journaling with Nature, the podcast for those who want to turn curiosity into wonder, a pencil sketch into a rabbit hole of discovery, a moment of stillness into a life full of joy. I'm your host, Bethan Burton. Let's open the pages of our nature journals and explore this world together. Hello, this is episode 139. Before we dive into the interview today with Sarah Hannis, I want to say a really big thank you to those people who have recently joined me on Patreon as supporters of the show. Thank you so much. Your support really means the world to me, and it means that I can make this podcast project sustainable in the long term. Thank you, of course, also to those supporters who have been with me on Patreon for a while. Some of you have been there right from the beginning. It means so much. If you're a listener who's not sure what Patreon is, it's a platform that gives people the opportunity to financially support creators for as little as $1 per month. For the Journaling with Nature podcast, patrons of the show get a little glimpse of the upcoming guests and also the chance to submit questions, which I then ask of the guests during my interviews. This has been a really delightful thing because I get an insight into what you want to know of the guests, and it brings in a whole new perspective. If this sounds like fun to you and you'd like the chance to ask your questions of upcoming podcast guests, you can follow the link in the show notes to join us on Patreon too. So now I'm so happy to share today's interview with you. Sarah Hannis is an illustrator and geologist living in Wales. In our conversation, we talked about Sarah's transition from working as a geologist to now becoming a freelance illustrator. We also talked about some of the many amazing projects that Sarah has been part of, telling the stories of people and places and nature through illustration. Let's listen. Sarah, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast.
Yeah, really nice to meet you, Methan. I'm really excited to be here.
We know each other from Instagram, and I'm excited about this opportunity to deepen our connection and get to know your story.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, that's really nice to hear. I've been following you since 2020, I think, and I've been really inspired by all the nature journaling stories, so thanks for sharing.
That's so beautiful. I would love to know about the origin story of your connection with nature and with creativity, and I'm wondering, where did it start, and did you have mentors or people in your life that modeled a love of those things, or how did it all begin?
Gosh, I'm not sure if I can remember that far back. Certainly as a child, I loved being outdoors. I did a lot of drawing as a child. I would say most of my adult life, I didn't do very much drawing at all, actually. I took it up again quite recently in the last 5 years. But as a child, I drew lots, and I mostly drew from books and photos. My parents used to get me old back copies of the BBC Wildlife magazine, and I used to draw the pictures of the birds and creatures out of that. I didn't draw that much from life, actually, but I had this really great little bird book, and I used to draw the birds out of it, and I think that's where my sort of love of nature started, really, was recognising the birds and really studying the detail through drawing. And that's something that I really love now, is that I use sort of nature journaling as a way to help me kind of identify what I'm seeing, really, and to really focus on the details.
Yeah, I find that nature journaling is such a great way, like you, for learning something. If you want to ID something or get to know it or cement it in your memory, that process of putting it down on paper seems to be somehow really powerful for connecting memory and knowledge.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tell me about your patch. So you live in Wales. What kind of places do you see? Tell me about what you see when you go outside, when you want to access nature.
Oh, well, I'm super lucky because I live on the coast, so the sea and the coastal cliffs are really close to me, so I can just walk there after work or at lunchtime. I also feel incredibly grateful to have a garden at the moment. So I lived for many years in Edinburgh in a little flat that had a shared garden, but I couldn't see it out the window. I could see a tree in the street, but it felt kind of quite nature deprived by comparison. Yeah. And particularly during lockdown, when we were stuck in the tiny flat, I took the opportunities that I could to go and walk in the local park to see some nature and some green. So now that we have a garden, I'm just, I feel very grateful to be able to just step outside my door and see some plants. And we dug a pond when we moved in, and I just love watching the plants grow and trying to grow plants as well as actually studying them and drawing them.
So you did some study in Edinburgh, studying illustration?
Yes. So my background is in geology, so I'm a trained scientist, but I just really had the sort of longing to learn some more creative stuff. And initially I took some time to try and do it under my own steam, but I found I just ended up, doing the laundry and things on my day off rather than actually doing anything creative. And I didn't have that sort of drive because I think back from my sort of childhood drawing of where I tried to draw from a photo, I tried to draw everything perfectly. And that is a real barrier to me. Like, it makes me not want to start because I think, I don't have time to do a perfect drawing, so I just won't do it. And like over the last 5 years and through doing an illustration course in Edinburgh, it's really given me some sort of direction and managed to get over that sort of whole perfection thing, because you have to do something within a certain time frame and you have to just sort of submit it no matter what.
For a project,
And we did a lot of sketching as part of the course. And initially I was so timid to be sketching out in public. I hated people, looking over my shoulder. I mean, they were all super supportive, but I just was like, I don't want anyone to see. It's not finished yet. It's not ready. But yeah, through the course of just practicing it, basically, I got to the point where I'm like, you know what, I don't care. I just want to draw this for me. And I get so focused, I almost don't even notice other people kind of walking past me. And now it's like a real compulsion. Like when I go outside, I'm like, oh, I want to draw this. I want to draw this. I'm a bit overwhelmed because I'm like, I want to draw it all. So yeah, for me, it's been a really nice transformation.
That's so lovely that you now feel that it's for you, that fear and worry about other people's opinions, but also about the quality, in inverted commas, of your work is irrelevant because it's the process and the joy that comes with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I don't know, having observed fellow illustrators in my class, is that the perfectionist thing is a real barrier, I think, for a lot of people, that people don't want to start because they think, I'm not good enough, or I can't draw that, it doesn't look right. But it doesn't matter. Anyone can make a mark with a pencil, and if it makes you feel happy, then it's so worth it.
Yeah. Let's go back a step and tell me about your life as a geologist, about your process, what happens in that field, and all the things that you've experienced in that arm of your career.
Well, I think at school I really loved art, and I really loved science, and it was hard for me to choose a career that combined both of them. And the careers advisors were like, you could do architecture, and I was like, well, I don't really like drawing buildings. I like drawing natural things. And almost completely by chance, I ended up doing geology just because there was a picture of a beautiful rock in one of the prospectuses, and I was like, oh, that's shiny. And I'd always picked up rocks as well. And it's very like, it's kind of the foundation of like what everything grows on. So for me, it sort of really clicked. And it turns out during the course, we did a lot of field sketches. We had to kind of observe the different rock formations and draw them so that, you could understand how they'd formed, and, learning about fossils and drawing them. I just love those aspects of it, totally.
Yeah. And how did that play out in terms of your career? What does the professional life of a geologist look like?
Well, I don't know if mine was necessarily typical, particularly as I feel like I've spent my whole life being somewhat directionless. I sort of jump from one thing to another just based on what happens, really. So I actually ended up working in the oil field for 3 years in Louisiana, which is definitely not something that I ever thought or planned for. But aside from the actual work itself, I had great opportunities to see some beautiful wildlife. Initially, I was quite unimpressed at going to Louisiana because I love climbing mountains and going to hills, and like Louisiana is about as flat as you could find. It's just basically a big swamp. But we saw alligators and raccoons and, all kinds of creatures and beautiful birds, and all the kind of mosses that hang down from the trees there is just really fantastic scenery. It's very atmospheric. And the work I was doing was very demanding. I like a lot of sleep, and it was very much like, working in shifts until it was done. I think the longest I stayed awake once was about 50 hours. I was just totally done for at the end of it. It was
Oh, wow.
it was not the life for me, but I mean, I quite enjoyed it in that, I was having such new experiences and, seeing things that I never thought I would see.
Yeah.
So I did that for 3 years, and then I came back to the UK, and I worked at the British Geological Survey. And I've worked there up until June, when I finally quit to be a full-time freelance illustrator.
Oh, wow.
So I'm super excited to be kind of starting my creative career at age 40-something. It seems a bit late in the day, but finally got there via various routes.
I love that. I think changing your direction midlife is a joyful, wonderful thing to do. And congratulations. That's a really recent big step.
Yes, it's been quite a momentous year, it feels like.
Yeah, that's so good. I'd love to talk about some of the projects that you have been part of, because on your website it seems like there's a real mix of collaborations with universities and community groups that aim to make a change in the world. And I'm really keen to talk about some of these specific projects. One of my listeners, Linda, would like to hear about the story of your research and creative process in designing the project Leith Walks on the Wild Side. I wonder if you can give the backstory about this project.
Yeah, I mean, I was so excited to be asked to be part of that project. It was with the British Ecological Society and the Scottish Wildlife Trust, or at least the lady who was helping me, who was the ecologist, was from there and had previously worked on a lot of projects with bats, so I was like super excited to pick her brains about that. And she had all these just great stories about, it was when I was in Edinburgh, so it was about various things where they'd help make pathways for otters and put up bat boxes and things, and there were all these like nature stories were like super inspiring to me. I was thinking, oh, maybe I should have done ecology instead of illustration. And the sort of backstory of why the art was being created, it was part of the Edinburgh Science Festival, and they were creating a virtual exhibition to kind of showcase art and how it can reimagine future green spaces in cities. So that was just great for me, because it combined my love of Edinburgh and the architecture, and also the kind of the imagination that you can have when you kind of cultivate your creative brain to just reimagine things, basically. And through chatting with the other people involved in the project, because it was sort of collaborative with the ecologist and others, just to kind of think, oh, would this work? What about this crazy idea? Maybe we could have like aerial walkways with vines hanging down and like places for waders to nest on the roof of the properties, and it was brilliant.
That's amazing. And I think that allowing you the freedom to imagine big, because we have our cities evolve as they do in whatever way and expand for whatever reason. But to have the space and the time to just let your creative brain go wild and imagine a space that was good for people and good for wildlife is such a beautiful thing to do.
Yeah, the actual location for it on Leith Walk was chosen because I think they'd done some studies looking at the sort of the demographics of the different people in the different areas, and how the sort of more underprivileged places had less access to green space, and how important green space is for people's well-being. And so Leith Walk at the moment is very grey, like kind of not quite concrete jungle, but I mean there are some beautiful buildings down it, but it's just lots and lots of cars going up and down it. There's been a lot of controversy there because there's a tram that they've put in one. So I think, I mean, obviously the tram is a great thing from the sort of environmental perspective, trying to increase public transport, but I think the actual installation of it was a bit of a caused a lot of disruption for the people living in that area.
Sure.
So yeah, it was quite a controversial project. And when we were picking the route, one of the people in the project was like, oh no, we should totally go for that, because it is controversial, so it makes people think about how it could be different. And you see pictures of tramways in other parts of the world which have got like green tracks, and the sort of shelters have all got like green spaces on the top for like insects and things. So there were like lots of opportunities for greening the space and making it a more sort of pleasant place to hang out, basically.
Amazing. Another really inspiring one that you've worked on is the Feeding the Nation project. I'd love for you to describe this one.
Yeah, so that again, it was actually funny how that project came about. I actually, it was when I was doing all of my random sketching outside, and I was on the train, sitting in the station, and I was drawing the station itself. It was, I think it was Chesterfield Station. Like it's one of those really old style stations with the kind of the twisted pillars that are painted in blue and white. So it's really cool looking. And the person who sat down next to me was like, "Oh, you're drawing. Are you are you a drawer? Are you somebody who draws things?" And so we just kind of got chatting, and she took my details, and it turns out she was a researcher from the University of Leeds. And they were putting together I know, it was very surprising. And so basically she wrote me into her next bid, which was for emergency funding during COVID to look at like food supplies. And there were lots of problems at that time with like supermarkets having empty shelves, and thinking more about the people that come to the UK from abroad to basically harvest the vegetables and do a lot of the sort of more menial tasks. And so their research was like, with these sort of impacts of Brexit and COVID and things, what impacts would we have? Are the fruit kind of going to literally be like rotting on the branches because nobody can get here, or maybe nobody wants to come here, or they're not able to come here because of the the Brexit sort of requirements? So it was like a really, I mean, I didn't get involved in the research as such, but they really, it's good for them because they didn't want to use photos of people where people can be identified.
Sure.
But they wanted to be able to capture the stories of the individuals. So they were doing a lot of interviews of the different migrant agricultural workers over, I think, a year or two, to find out all of their individual stories and their struggles, and what they like, why they come, would they come back, what were they struggling with, what could they help make it easier for them. So yeah, it was super interesting.
That is really, really interesting, and the illustrations are so beautiful, and you really capture these stories of the lives of the people and what they do in the morning and how they spend their days, and it's really evocative and beautiful, what you've created.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I was really pleased to be able to work on that project.
I'd love to hear about, because these are really in-depth projects that must take a lot of thought. I would love to hear about the process. Like when someone comes to you with one of these in-depth projects, how do you begin? How do you turn someone's vision into something on a page?
I think it really involves a lot of talking, really,
Yeah.
and sharing of images when they have images. So in the case of the Feeding the Nation project, they had somebody had been filming a raspberry farm in Scotland, and I'd actually seen some of them when I'd been away on holiday. So it was good for me because I had my own photographs from when I'd been there, and you could really like imagine the sort of the trudging through the mud in February and the dark early mornings and things. And unlike I think more sort of traditional illustration briefs, usually people have a very clear idea of what they want, and it's all sort of written down, and you just respond to that.
Yes.
These projects have been much more sort of in communication with the researchers themselves, and I start off by drawing tiny little thumbnails, maybe only like 2 to 3 centimeters square, and I might draw like 5 or 6 of them for each final image that I create. So I'm kind of responding to the sort of imagery that people are showing me, or what they're telling me, explaining to me about their sort of the stories, to try and capture little snippets of it. And that one in particular, we were doing sort of not quite, they weren't really like a cartoon sort of strip, but they were like 10 sort of related images for each story that sort of showed what like different aspects of their daily lives. So yeah, so I do the little thumbnails, and then they decide which one they like best, and then draw them up again a little bit bigger in pencil, and then there's sort of more opportunities for them to kind of be like, oh well, could you maybe either say include more diversity, or change the angle of this, or emphasize this point, and then slowly we sort of build up to the final one. So yeah, the final ones for these I did in pen and ink. They originally wanted something that was quite sketchy, but I actually found after that much study it was quite hard to kind of bring back that sort of sketching spontaneity that you get. So yeah, that's something I'd like to work on actually, is to sort of keep that sort of dynamicness of like sketching something quite quickly potentially in the field, and bring that into my illustration, because I find it quite hard to do.
That is an interesting challenge, that when you're doing something for a final piece, maybe there's a tendency to overwork it or to perfect it too much or something.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sort of fighting with my sort of old nature of like wanting the perfectionist, but luckily for me, I'm not that good at drawing people, so they never look perfect.
Well, people is an interesting, intimidating subject for a lot of artists. For myself included, I've always balked at that, and I'm actually like deliberately cultivating that as something that I do, even though it feels uncomfortable. Do you get that feeling inside you as well? Like, oh, now it's time to draw a person?
I totally do. Yes, I like sometimes when when I'm at the beach, I'll be like, okay, I'm going to force myself to draw people, and it just sort of, in a way, it just, I don't know why this should be, but it sort of feels kind of embarrassing that you haven't really captured them, or they look a bit not, I don't know, like a bit more alien. And somebody explained it to me that like, because we're so used to seeing people, we know what they sort of should look like. So if you do some of the lines that they kind of like, either the legs are too long, or the bodies are too wide, or their face is a bit squashed, it's kind of immediately obvious. And I think getting a likeness of a person is incredibly difficult. Like I've tried to do recently. I've been doing some online life drawing. There's some really great free sessions where you can different members of the Zoom call draw each other, basically. So people pose for the length of the song. So it gets you really used to kind of capturing people's faces very quickly. They're like I'm really grateful for the people who run those sessions. And maybe I should mention them. Can I mention them?
Yeah, please do. Please do.
So one of them is a lady called Chloe in Paris, and her Instagram is drawingisfree.org, I think.
Lovely.
_org. And the other one is Kirsty Lockhart in Dundee, and she's pencils 40 with a number 4. So yeah, I found these through other people's Instagrams, and I thought, oh, that seems really great. And I finally had time to actually try it, and it's really great. It's quite addictive.
I've seen the portraits that you've been drawing and posting, and they're amazing. They really capture the character and the details of the faces. I was really impressed and inspired by the portraits that you've been posting.
Oh, thank you very much. I still feel like they wouldn't necessarily look exactly like the people, but they do at least look like people, unlike some of my earlier sketches.
Through all this, with the stories and the projects you've been doing that involve people, and just the process of, or the stories of people and nature, I'm interested in whether you have a strong sense that we as humans are part of the story of nature, because it's easy for us to feel like humans are separate and nature is something that we look at or observe and it's over there, or it's not part of us. But I'm wondering, what's your sense of like humans as part of the nature story?
I think a lot of people are quite disconnected, as people say, from nature at the moment, and I can only assume from my very poor historical knowledge that clearly wasn't the case in the past. That people used to live much closer to nature, they had less shelter from it, essentially. Whereas now people can really kind of insulate themselves from it. A bit like we were talking earlier about our houses. I think you can live in your little box and never leave it if you don't want to, or if you're, some people aren't able to. But I wonder how many of those people feel that there's something sort of missing in their lives, and wish that they could get out and experience some nature. Because for me it's sort of, well, I guess it goes back to the beginning of everything, really. The food chain that keeps us alive, really. So yeah, I think it's, the nature connection for me is super important, and I wish more people recognised it. In some ways it's kind of frustrating when you see people not recognising it, or just sort of profit over nature, and it just seems such a shame, because nature is what is keeping us all alive. So
yes, and I think that there was a realization around COVID. You mentioned that you were in a flat at that time, and I think at that time the nature journal community exploded. Connection with creativity also exploded. It was like people needed to make that connection, and that this was one of the ways they could do that. And I think even when we don't recognize it, our bodies need nature, our hearts need nature, our minds need nature, and there's something incredibly soothing and healing about being out there. And whether we recognize it or not, we're hardwired to benefit from that.
Yeah, definitely, and just be part of it.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about your experience through COVID and that sort of disconnect, but finding nature where you could in those little snippets.
I think initially, both my partner and I were really very terrified of COVID, as I'm sure many people were. He'd only recently recovered from a quite serious respiratory illness, so we were perhaps more paranoid than some, or not paranoid, but worried.
Yeah, cautious.
And so cautious. So we, in our 1 hour or whatever it was that we were allowed out of the house, we were going super early in the morning to try and avoid people, because obviously we lived in a capital city. It's quite hard to avoid people, passing people on the stairs or just outside. So we were quite lucky in that we lived very close to the local park, and we just had some actually really beautiful experiences that we wouldn't have otherwise had, because we were going out at a time of day that we would never normally be even awake, probably. So we saw some beautiful sights of the full moon over the city, where you could see all the details and the craters. And we had one amazing experience one morning where we actually saw a badger running through the middle of the park, and we were right in the centre of Edinburgh, and I was just like, oh my goodness, this is so cool. And it was just, trotting along like it knew where it was going.
That's amazing.
So I just had the most incredible experience, and just hearing the dawn chorus and seeing the sun come up over the city was just really, it just really made you appreciate it so much more, because you knew that this was your one moment that you got, and you had to really snatch it.
Yes, that sounds amazing. And now with this new life as a full-time freelance illustrator, I'm interested in the way projects come to you, and this story you told of sketching outdoors and how someone saw you and then a project developed out of that. I'm wondering about your projects in the past, how they come to you and how you choose them. Do you chase them, or do you let them come to you? And now how it's going to be now that you're making your living in this way. I'm interested in how projects come to you and how you generate them.
Well, I guess that's something I need to think about myself, to be honest. So far, I've been incredibly lucky. The projects have all come to me, either, like I say, from the lady that I sat next to on the train, and then I got another project from word of mouth from another university who'd seen those illustrations, and they wanted some similar. So I was able to kind of move from job to job, really, without any effort on my part, which is kind of the perfect scenario. Some of them have come through people I know. I also I have an Etsy shop, and I make cards, and I did have somebody contact me and say, look, somebody has sent me your card and my details are on the back of it, and I really love it, and could you design a logo for my department or my new cool research team? I was like, yes, I would love to do that. So sometimes I guess more often now people I don't know who are approaching me, and it's just it's a really lovely feeling to think, oh, somebody actually likes my art enough that they want to ask me to create something. So,
that's delightful.
Thank you. Yeah, and so going forward, I guess I don't know whether I will have enough work from sort of word of mouth, or whether I'm going to need to go out and look for it. But at the moment, I have some projects still lined up, so I don't have to worry about it till after Christmas, at least.
I would love to hear you talk about your collaboration with the group Curu Action, because I have a T-shirt of yours which I bought inspired by your post on Instagram. But I'd love to hear you talk about Curu Action and that collaboration.
So that could have been during lockdown as well. I'm not sure.
It was some time ago.
Yeah, it was maybe 3 or 4 years ago. And I've always loved watching birds and drawing birds, and particularly where I was living, we moved out of Edinburgh and we're living next to a huge nature reserve. Oh, it's just the most beautiful place. It's a big estuary, and the curlews come there in the winter to rest. I think they're the ones that come from Scandinavia to the UK. Wow. And so I got to see some really quite close. I bought a little binocular so I could watch them and tried to draw them through the binocular. It was just lovely to see. And so when Curu Action were asking for ambassadors, because they're quite a new charity, and they aim to help conserve curlews in the UK and in other places, primarily through helping fund things like the field work that's necessary to help protect their eggs. I got to go to their various webcasts at the beginning where they were explaining about the plight of the UK curlew, and I think it's a keystone species, and I'm probably going to get this wrong, but I think that means it's one of the species that the fate of it sort of reflects the fate of quite a lot of other things.
Yes, exactly.
And it's quite a large bird, so it's quite easy to spot and it's sort of quite enigmatic. So with its quite unique curved bill, so I think it's sort of one of those ones that like people recognise and they can kind of get behind.
Yes.
So although it seems there's quite a lot of curlews, I think quite a high proportion of them actually breed in the UK, and I think the problem was that the nests were failing, and so the curlews live for a long time. I think I'm going to get this wrong as well, something like 30 years maybe,
wow,
or 20 years.
Yeah.
So they're quite long-lived. A lot of seabirds are quite long-lived, so you might not notice declines in the population from like them not raising enough chicks for quite a while.
Sure.
So at some point, they haven't got enough babies, and then suddenly they'll just the population will just plummet when the older generation die off. So I thought this was just such an interesting, I just didn't know about it before. So I was really keen to help the charity, and I didn't have much money to actually give them money, but I kind of volunteered my illustrations instead.
Amazing.
So I've designed a couple of t-shirts for them, and I sell. I made a lino cut of some of the curlews on the estuary near where I live, and I've made those into cards and notebooks and lino cut prints, and I sell those, and I give 50% of the profits to the charity.
That's such a delightful way of supporting a charity. Getting behind them with the skills that you have, with the tools that you have.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think all through my sort of illustration career, though, they're sort of advising you not to work for free, because, people will try and take advantage of that. But in my case, I felt like, well, I would love to give them money, but I don't have any, but I can kind of donate my skills instead. So I felt really happy to be able to volunteer my skills in this way.
That's fantastic. And you mentioned printmaking, and I'd love to talk about that because it seems like a really big part of your creative practice.
Yes, well, I've not had much time to do it recently, but I do really love it. I guess I've mainly done lino cut printing at home because it's something that's easier to do at home. But when I was in Edinburgh, I was lucky enough to live near the Edinburgh Printmaking studio, and so I joined some courses to learn like how to do different kinds of printing, like etching on metal plates and stone lithography, which was very cool. Being a geologist, I was like, oh, stones.
Oh, yes. Tell me about that. Tell me what that felt like to have the stone in your hand and then to be using that to make something creative.
Yeah, it was I don't know if I can remember the whole process, but it was such a bizarre process. You have these flat pieces of limestone, and they're from a very particular formation in Germany that has very fine-grained limestone. And so it needs to have very fine grain so it picks up the details. And you draw on it with like a wax crayon, and then the ink somehow sticks to the wax. It's like an incredible process. I do not know how it got invented, but I think it's sort of one of the really early printmaking techniques that they used to use for printing all kinds of things, books and stamps, I think. I'm probably getting all of my facts wrong here, but it's a very old form of printmaking, so I was really excited to have a go. It's not something I think you could really easily try at home unless you had like proper huge presses. They've got absolutely gigantic presses there that they wouldn't even fit in any of the rooms of my house. I print on a very tiny like hand pressy type press, and I've also got a mini roller press as well, which is actually not really a press. It's actually for cutting out shapes. It's I don't know what you call them. I don't know, some kind of like die cut machine, I think.
Okay.
Which I kind of altered to use as a lino cut print. So I've done little etchings at home just on pieces of scrap plastic, when you get packaging that has those annoying plastic things and you're like, oh, I don't know what to do with that. You can scratch designs on it and put ink into the scratches. So I just love the sort of experimental nature of it. We had some friends come to visit with 2 boys, and one of them's very into art, so I saved some the cartons, the Tetra Pak cartons, because I'd seen online that you can use those for printing as well, because they're kind of shiny on the inside, so if you wash them you can cut bits out and like scratch into them, and then that holds the ink, so you can make really cool little prints out of really just waste pieces of material that otherwise it would be thrown away. So I just really love that sort of that aspect.
Yeah, what a beautiful way to do this creative process in an ecological way and reuse something or use something so you don't have to buy more art materials.
Definitely, and I would like to get into using the kind of the actual lino that's made out of linseed, because I've got a lot of stock at the moment of the one which is essentially plastic, which I'm like, oh no, I don't. I really try not to use so much plastic, but I've kind of got it now, so I'm going to finish it up. But the good thing about it is that it does sort of last, for as many prints as I want, really.
Yes,
so I think if I'd done the Curu one out of the old, the sort of traditional lino, I probably would have had to recarve it because it does degrade with time. So yeah, there are some advantages to using things that are less biodegradable, but I'm going forward, I'm going to try and only use biodegradable materials.
Tell me about that, because I didn't know that you could do lino printing with what kind of base is it, the natural version?
I think it's made out of linseed oil, and it's Hessian backed.
Does it have the same rubbery feeling?
Yeah, I think it's slightly stiffer. So, whereas the rubber, you kind of, when you cut through it, it sort of slides through almost like butter.
Yes.
And it's a bit sort of bouncy. Some people actually really don't like it. If they started solely on the grey lino. But it's very good if you've got like problems with your wrists and you can't push as hard because the grey lino is quite hard. You need very sharp tools. And obviously, it's much safer to use very sharp tools as well. Just because it cuts where you want and you're not going to, the blade isn't going to get stuck. But I have got some of it to try. But I'm looking forward to having a go next time I get some time.
Yeah, I have one of my thumbs has an injury, and it's from my teenage years when I was in like grade 8, grade 9 art class doing a lino cut and sliced myself. So every time we talk about lino printing, I like rub this little numb section on my thumb.
Yeah, the scars to show for it.
Yeah, but I love prints. I think there's something so fascinating and beautiful about the prints because although it is the same print, each one is slightly different and you never really know what it's going to look like when you pull it off. I find that part of it, the unknown of pulling up the print, really, really beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely. There's such lovely textures. And actually, the moment, I'm guessing they might share this with other printmakers, that is so exciting is when you've just finished one and you just can't wait to print it because you're just like, I really want to see what it looks like. And
yes.
Nobody's seen this before.
Yes, amazing. And with yours, it seems like you do like a base color and then do maybe a line drawing on top or something, like multiple layers. Yeah. Tell me about that.
There's a few different ways you can do it, but I quite often use 2 different blocks that it takes some careful sort of tracing to make sure the pictures overlie, basically, but I do it in 2 layers. So one layer is the kind of the base colour, and then I have another layer that has the lines on. And you can kind of have infinite number of layers, really. You just... The hard part is making sure they all line up before you start carving them, and then also make sure they line up on the paper. So there's a lot of like fiddly kind of sticking bits of card around the edge to make sure everything is properly in line. I guess the most reliable way of doing it is to do a reduction cut, but that is very scary. So that's where you start with one piece of lino and you only use one piece. So you do the colour outer layer, print it, and then you carve the colour part away and you just leave the bit you want as the line. So that's very nerve-wracking because you don't want to mess up what you've already done. and you can't go back.
Yes, exactly. You'd have to do as many prints as were ever going to exist and then do that again and again.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. So I've done a few of those, but I tend to quite like to use my lino print sort of multi-purpose, so I use them for actually creating art prints, but also cards and other things, so it sort of maximises the use. It's sort of my way of feeling a bit guilty about the fact that it's plastic and that like I want to get the maximum amount of use out of it before it gets landfilled. So that's wonderful. That's really wonderful. And your website said you've been experimenting with some combining art forms in Photoshop. I'm interested in learning more about that. Oh yeah, that's something that I learned how to do in my illustration class, actually. And that's a really good way of being able to get, for example, like you were talking about the print textures into something that is not a print, but sort of, and I love like printing different things, like textured, scrunched up paper, bits of silver foil, any kind of rubbish basically that's lying around. bits of fabric, and they all create like beautifully printed textures, and you can then kind of, I mean, some people collage with them. I tend to do the digital collage because I don't know, I've tried collage and I like what it looks like, but I don't seem to be very very good at it, or like it doesn't really kind of grab me. So I do the more sort of digital collage instead.
That's really fun. I like that. I have played a little with Photoshop, but not a lot, and I think that there's a lot of creative things can be done combining art forms or combining different sections of your creative process, because it seems like you have a lot of branches to your process.
Yes, I think that's something I kind of struggle with a little bit as an illustrator, because a lot of illustrators have like one particular style that they, are naturally drawn to and that they really practice and they get really good at. Whereas I feel like at least when I was doing the class, it was like I was like a kid in a candy store. I was like, I want to try everything, and I never really found one in particular that I really wanted to pursue, because I feel like, if I just do this one thing, then I won't be able to do this thing. And so I do have quite an eclectic portfolio, I would say. I've tried all kinds of different things, paper cutting and all sorts, and that's something over the next 6 months to a year, now that I'm fully freelance, I'm hoping to have a bit more time to kind of address and think about like how I want to kind of continue my art career. And I think it's nice to sort of develop and go through phases and be like, I really want to do this for a little bit. I don't think I'm ever going to settle on just one thing.
And I think that's completely fine. I was talking to someone recently about this, how some people are very, very specific and they dive into that and they spend their entire life doing one thing and getting really good at that one thing. And then there's other people who spread their time and energy over different media and different subjects. And I think that both of those are really valid and beautiful ways to express yourself creatively.
Yeah, and I think that is a really interesting point, really. Like, somebody did say to me once that I'm just kind of wasting my time, like trying lots of different things, and if I just focused on one thing, I'd get really good at it. But I really realised that actually it's just that person's mindset. Some people's brains just work in a straight line, and they have something that they're good at and they just do that. And then other people have multiple avenues and they do those, and that's fine. People are different. That's why, it just makes a nice society when everyone was saying very boring.
That's exactly what I was going to say. That's why the world is so interesting. That's why people are so interesting. Yeah, that's good. Let's talk about nature journaling. You are a lover of plants, a lover of nature. Tell me about your nature journaling practice.
Well, I think I didn't even realise it was a thing until I heard about your the conference that you'd organised, and that I was like, actually there are other people that do this. Before, I mean, I just used to draw plants or draw animals, birds, because I wanted to. I don't know. I guess I was just fascinated by them, really, and for me, it's a way of really studying them. I really realised that drawing really makes me look at things in a way that I just don't look at things otherwise. You could just give things like fleeting glances. It's only really when you kind of look at that and think, well, how would I actually draw it or, translate it onto the page, that you really notice all the tiny details. And I think I've always, like I said, really been interested in all the tiny details. I think it's a sort of scientific training, is that, and just really like noticing things. I think I just really like those kind of observations, and almost the smaller the better, really.
Yes.
Working out what to include and what not to include. Like, sometimes when I'm just doing a quick sketch, you just have the kind of very rough outline, but then other times you really get kind of bogged down in, say, like the kind of the bits underneath the flower petals that are maybe like a bit furry or a bit spiky, and how they kind of interlock and they look a bit like dragon scales, and there's just like all this amazing stuff that, depending on the amount of time and you have available and what your brain kind of wants at that moment, you can get really into something, or you can just see it as part of the bigger landscape. So I really like that sort of different scales you get depending on your amount of focus and what you want to look at. So it's kind of up to you.
Yeah, I love that you said that, because there is one really useful nature journaling technique, which is to look exactly like you said. Look at the big picture, look at something in its full form, and then look at something with a microscope or a jeweler's loupe or a magnifying tool, and and get right into it. And I love those days when you fall into the details, the minutiae of like, what's under this leaf, what's that vein doing there, and just getting into those details that, and I think this is a way of seeing the world that's really unique and really special. And it is its own form of flow, I think. You know, we talk about creative flow when an artist goes into that place where time doesn't exist and you don't think about anything else. But when you are looking at the details of a leaf or putting that down and getting really into that perspective, for me, it is a kind of flow. Do you have that same feeling?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say that I'm sure most people must have something in their minds, or particularly if they have busy minds, something in their life that does that like takes away everything else, where you just focus on one thing. Like for me, I used to do a lot of climbing, and that was it for me. When I was focusing on climbing, I was just focusing on that.
Yes.
Looking at what was in front of me, and feeling the next little handhold on the rock and foothold, and being either terrified or like super exhilarating, depending. And that totally empties your brain of anything else. Like I guess some people maybe do like meditation for a similar reason, that you just empty your head. And I think that nature journaling now has like really taken over that slot in my head. I can really be totally absorbed for hours just looking at, different scales of things, tiny minutiae. And like I said, I didn't really know that nature journaling was a thing initially, but I think that you can get real benefit from knowing it is a thing and seeing how other people do it. Like I just feel like there's so many things that I want to try, having seen the various sort of Instagram posts and talks and things about like making your own colours, like so one of the prompts last year that you made that really I realised that I don't focus on at all, that I'd like to focus on more, is like smell.
Yes.
Like I'm like aware of the like general background smell of like the leaves and things, but like on a kind of smaller scale I maybe don't look at it. And at one point I definitely have different phases of what I'm interested in. So one year I got super interested in fungi, and I went on a lot of fungi forays with people, and a lot of the identification of fungi, one of the things is smell.
Right.
And so I did get used to smelling them. They're like, does this smell of almonds? And I realised that my sense of smell is very not well honed. I can't I can smell it and I'm like, oh, that smells familiar, but I can't identify what it is. So that's a really interesting one for me, because I find it quite difficult to think about the smell or be like, oh, I think that's a mint. Particularly things like herbs. I'm like, is this... If someone... We had a test once where we had like a random herbal tea bag and we had to guess what was in it. And it was thyme, but like we were all guessing rosemary or garlic. Like we just really actually like a sort of dissociated smell when you don't see the pattern or whatever that goes with it. Well, for me at least, it's quite difficult to identify what it is. So it is something that, although you maybe don't capture, in pen and ink, you can write notes about it and remember it.
Yeah, that's the lovely thing about nature journaling, is that because we use words and pictures, we can layer these observations on top of each other, and words help us support these senses or sensory observations that are hard to capture with a visual, with a drawing or a painting. And we're so used to focusing on the things that we see, if that sense is something that's available to us. But those nature journal prompts during International Nature Journaling Week really threw into perspective for me. I don't have the language to describe the things that I'm experiencing with my sense of taste, with my sense of smell, even with my sense of hearing. These are really hard things, and especially if you taste something, like you taste mint, for example, the words that come out of my mouth are, it tastes minty. Or if it's rosemary, it tastes like rosemary. I just did not have the words to capture that, but it's something that I really want to practice.
Yeah, I did a really great training course once with the British Trust for Ornithology that was about bird song and identifying bird song. And it was really great because they got us to go outside and listen to a bird it could be any bird that we heard, and then we had to describe what it sounded like to the other people in the group, and they had to guess what we were describing.
Oh, what a great activity.
Oh, it was really
Hard.
good. It was really difficult,
Yeah.
because one, birds make lots of, the same species of bird can make a lot of different noises.
Sure.
And you weren't allowed to sort of say what it sort of meant to sound like. Yellow hammers, I think, it's supposed to say a little bit of bread and no cheese, or is that yellow hammers? Maybe it's blue tats. I'm not sure, but anyway, there's certain sort of things that bird watchers use to sort of describe the sounds, and so it was really difficult to kind of go back to basics and like really think about the sort of the frequency and the pitch, and you realise you're not really familiar with the words to describe it, and like you were saying with smells and taste, it's like a very individual thing. It's not like you're taught how to describe them. So it's really difficult, I think.
It's interesting focusing on the limitations of language, because I've noticed this with colour. I really love colour, and I find that we have vocabulary for some of the colours, but then a whole suite of other colours we just don't have the language for. And we actually played a game when we were focusing on colour with one of the workshops for Nature Journaling Week, where we were naming colours, and that was a really interesting process because it helps you tap into that and build up a visual or build up a vocabulary around something that's really limited. But we can do that with the other senses as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think I would probably be very, very bad at that, but it like you say, it's something that you don't really learn, and unless you have a mentor or your parents or somebody who are very sort of into that and like help you go through it. But it's a really interesting thing.
It's a fun thing to do. I want to hear more about your nature journaling. You created a collection of drawings for 100 days, 100 wild plants that are in your local area. I want to hear more about this because the collection altogether is so beautiful.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, that was part of the one of the 100 Days projects. So I don't know if you've heard about this, but I joined the 100 Days Project Scotland because I'd first joined it when I was in Scotland. But actually anyone in the world can do it, and I think there's others around the world of similar kind of concept. But it's basically to just do one creative thing every day and then record it to kind of hold yourself accountable. And the good thing about doing it via social media is you have like a kind of online community of other people who are going through the same thing and struggling when they get to like day 3 and they're like, oh no, I've run out of things. And I'd had a bit of experience doing it before. Like I've done a few that I did make it to 100 days, and then a few where I didn't make the 100 days. I got to various stages because life gets in the way, or you're just not feeling so motivated about that particular project. So however you choose to approach it is totally up to you as well. So some years I chose things that were way too ambitious. I was like, there's no way I'm going to be able to do that every day, but it seems like a good idea at the time, and so I tried to choose something this year that would sort of fit around my schedule, that would bring me joy to actually do every day, that would kind of try and get me into some kind of habit forming thing where I want to do this, so I'm going to do it. But I maybe wouldn't do it if that wasn't part of the task. It's very easy. It's very easy to just say, "Oh, I'll do it tomorrow," or I'm a massive procrastinator. So sometimes having a project like this really helps me. It actually forces me to do it every day. So what I decided to do was to draw a plant or flower every day for 100 days, and I decided to do it like a kind of nature journal where I wanted to learn more about the local plants, and rather than go out there with an ID book, I thought I'll go out there and draw the plant and write down everything that I notice about it, and then hopefully manage to identify it when I get home. So that was a really instructive process, because some of the plants I already knew. Some of them I realised that what I looked at when I was trying to identify it were not helpful characteristics. Okay. So I still don't necessarily know what they are. And so I just learned so much about plants through it, really. It was just a really like kind of easy, like bite-sized way of learning like one plant a day. So it worked really well for me. I mean, I'm not saying it wasn't difficult to go out, and sometimes when I had projects I'd maybe do 2 in one day if I knew I had something on the next day. And everyone gets a bit behind and has to catch up. But overall I managed, like on average one a day for 100 days. So yeah, it was really great. And people kept saying to me, oh, there's no way you're going to find like 100 different flowers out at this time of year. And it started in May and went all the way through to September, so it was quite a sort of span of the summer. But there were so many that I didn't have time to draw, and some of the plants I was feeling a bit panicked, because I was like, oh, I need to draw that before it goes over, because a lot of wild plants, they maybe only flower for like a week or two, and then so you have to kind of catch it while it's out, and then they maybe have multiple flowerings, so like if you missed it the first time, it will maybe come back into flower. And I just learned so much just from like observing the plants around me, and it just felt like a real tonic, really. It was great.
That's amazing. And I love that you said you came home and sometimes realized you hadn't picked out the details that helped you identify a plant, and then maybe that informed what you observed next time with the different plants. That's such an interesting learning experience.
Yeah, absolutely. It worked really well for me. Like I say, I think sometimes just going out there with an identification book, it's not so somehow not as inspiring as actually looking first and then trying to work it out for me.
And is it true that you did them on the back of old business cards?
Yes, that's right. So because I've moved offices a few times in my geology job, so I've got lots of old business cards that have my old address on. So I thought, oh, what can I do then? And these are the small kind of bite-sized little bits of paper.
Size. Yeah.
Yeah. And one thing I'd realised from previous projects is that if you end up doing them on kind of scraps of paper or like paper of a particular size, you spend quite a lot of time kind of cutting the paper to size. So I thought these are ready-made. Or if you have a book, then you end up having to cart the book around with you. And if you're, if it's raining or you don't want to carry it with you, then this way you just carry the one piece that you're going to draw on that day. So it's like
genius,
just easier to manage. So yeah, it was great.
And you've collated them all into a digital little booklet, right?
Yeah, I decided to make them into a little zine. Just sort of as a memento, really, because I have got the actual originals, of course, but they're not bound in any way. They're quite sort of, I don't know, they're a bit like a pack of cards, I guess, to look through. But this is a way that I could sort of share it more easily with my friends and family as well. And if anyone else was interested, there were some people from the project who were other people who were doing the challenge who bought it, which was lovely.
That's so special. Tell me about your process when you go out. What do you carry with you? What are your favourite tools? What do you sit on the ground? Do you take a stool? What's your process for sketching outside in for example, when you go out to do one of the plants for the project?
Well, I'd say incredibly minimalist, actually. Yeah. I'm very lazy when it comes to carrying things. I would love to be, some of the people I follow on Instagram who do outdoor sketching, they take like a kind of huge pencil case and a kind of roll of paint and tools with them, and they're sort of set up for like an hour or so. Whereas I think because a lot of the sketching I've done outside, I've been on walks with my family or my partner. I don't want them to have to wait for me, so I try and do all the sketches within about 10 minutes so that they're just not waiting for too long. So that's really kind of informed the way that I do the quick sketches, basically. So I have a very tiny paint tin. It's actually a child's paint tin, which I filled up with a professional watercolour in each of the little holes. And then I've got a water brush, so the water is inside my brush, so I don't need to take a pot of water. And I've got a fountain pen, a refillable fountain pen with waterproof ink. So that's all that I take with me. For some of the nature journaling ones that I did in this project, I did take a carry mat to sit on the floor if it was very wet, if I was trying to get down low to the plants that were close to the ground. But usually I prefer to sketch standing up or crouching. So that also limits the length of time that I sketch for, because I can't crouch for very long before my legs start to go numb.
I guess all these limitations, like the limitations in your kit, also the limitations in being able to crouch, also the limitations of sketching when somebody's waiting for you, also obliterate those worries. We were talking before about the perfectionist tendency or this desire to make something perfect, but all those things just help you get on with it, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if I hadn't got over that, I would literally sketch nothing outside because I would never find like an hour in the day to myself to just think, okay, I'm going to just go and draw something. So yeah, this works really well for me because it's maybe not the most beautiful sketch in the world, but it really reminds me what I saw. I can remember, what the weather was like, what I felt like, my mood at the time. It really just, I look at it and I can kind of recall that exact moment in a way that if I hadn't done it or if I'd just taken a photo, I probably wouldn't.
And all those 100 sketches together look so beautiful, and they give such an overview of what's around you, not anyone else, but like what's in your place that you're seeing during this period of time. It's quite astonishing.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, no, I agree. It is really nice to see them all together. You do get a real sense of satisfaction at the end of a project like that when you think, wow, I actually managed to make it. I finished it, and look at these.
Yeah, it's amazing. So, yeah, it's a good
Congratulations.
Feeling. Yeah, it's really cool. So you mentioned your Etsy store. I'd love for you to tell people where they can find you, and if they want to find your work and hire you as a freelance illustrator.
Wow, that would be lovely.
Maybe you can tell people the best places to find you online.
I think probably the best is my website, which is sarahhannis.com. That's Hannis. And through that, I've got links to my Instagram, my Facebook, which I've rarely use, and my Etsy shop is on there as well.
Beautiful. Sarah, thank you so much for joining me and for sharing your story and these beautiful moments of nature connection and nature journaling. Thank you for joining me on the podcast.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's been a real pleasure.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Sarah. Something that I loved about her work is this thread of social and environmental consciousness and awareness that sort of underpins everything that she does, like using her illustration to help curlew action, and taking care to use up art supplies and being conscious of the types of things that can be used and reused that might have otherwise ended up in landfill. I think this is a wonderful thing and something we should all be thinking more about. Please follow the links in the show notes to find Sarah's website and Instagram, and do reach out to her if you have a project that needs an illustrator. Thank you so much for listening. See you next week.